Imagine this. A quiet English monastery sometime in the late Middle Ages, the smell of candle wax and old parchment. Rows of monks hum low chants in the dim light of dawn. Everything is calm, until Brother Thomas suddenly stands up, drops his prayer book and begins to dance. At first it's just an awkward shuffle, then another monk joins in, and another. Before anyone can say amen, half the abbey looks like it's auditioning for a medieval version of Saturday Night Fever. Some monks are spinning, some are hopping, one is waving his rosary like it's a tambourine. The abbot stares in disbelief. This was not on the day's liturgical schedule, and yet they can't stop. Hours pass, the dancing spreads. What started as devotion becomes delirium. And this, dear dreamer, is the true baffling story of the dancing English monks, where religious hysteria met slapstick chaos in the heart of the Middle Ages. I'm your host from Sleepy Dreamer in America, and tonight we'll drift gently through history's strangest footwork, where faith, fear, and fatigue collided on the monastery floor. So take a deep breath, loosen your shoulders, and let's step softly into the rhythm of medieval madness. Picture Europe around the 14th century. Life is hard, faith is strong, and entertainment is limited. There's no Netflix, no caffeine, and not a single TikTok dance challenge. The highlight of the week might be bread that didn't go moldy. The Middle Ages were a curious mix of deep piety and deep weirdness. People prayed with all their hearts, fasted for days, and occasionally, for reasons no one could quite explain, burst into uncontrollable dancing. It wasn't joyful celebration. It wasn't performance. It was compulsion. Their bodies moving without permission, twisting, hopping, sometimes until collapse. Some witnesses swore the dancers were possessed by demons. Others thought it was punishment from God. A few thought they were blessed, saints caught in divine ecstasy. And somewhere in between all that confusion were monks. Now, monks weren't exactly known for cutting loose. They lived in structured silence. Wake up before sunrise, pray 7 times a day, copy manuscripts, eat plain stew, sleep on straw. The closest thing they had to cardio was kneeling. But every so often, something strange rippled through those sacred halls, a kind of contagious movement. One monk began twitching, another swaying, another tapping his feet, until the entire room looked like a holy flash mob. Chroniclers called it Chorea Sancti Vitae, the dance of Saint Vitus. A divine frenzy, they said, or maybe a demonic one. Some monasteries tried to pray it away. Others joined in, hoping that by dancing they might dance the devil out. Imagine the scene. An abbot clutching a crucifix while 20 monks twirl around him in circles, chanting Kyrie eleison between gasps for breath. Some cried, some laughed, some begged for mercy, and some just kept spinning like broken toys wound too tight. It was part tragedy, part absurd theater, and part mystery that's never been fully solved. Historians think this dancing mania appeared when societies were under immense stress. The 14th century had plenty of that. The Black Death wiped out half of Europe. Famines followed. Wars never seemed to end. So when everything hurt, physically, spiritually, economically, maybe the body found its own bizarre outlet, a release through rhythm, a kind of emotional exorcism. The monks, of course, didn't frame it like that. They saw it as divine punishment or temptation, or maybe the devil himself sneaking into their souls, literally the soles of their feet. Some even built chapels to Saint Vitus, patron of dancers and nervous disorders, hoping he'd take pity and make the madness stop. But the more they prayed, the more people danced. Reports began to travel across Europe, first in German towns like Aachen and Cologne, then in France, then across the Channel into England. Everywhere, people, peasants, merchants, even clergy, were overtaken by this strange rhythmic affliction. And though our main story centers on the English monks, the broader wave gave it context. Imagine being a peasant farmer and hearing rumors that in some faraway town, hundreds had danced themselves to death. Then one day, Your local monastery bell rings, and instead of Gregorian chant, you hear thumping footsteps. The monks are dancing. The townsfolk gather to watch, half horrified, half entertained. Some say the monks' robes flap like wings. Others swear they hear ghostly music though no instruments play. At night, exhausted bodies collapse on cold stone floors. In the morning, some start again, unable to resist the pull of that invisible beat. It was hysteria, but also performance. A medieval tragedy wearing the mask of a comedy. Now, medieval medicine was, well, optimistic. Their main treatments for everything from headaches to demonic possession involved bleeding, leeches, or a quick pilgrimage. When it came to dancing monks, cures ranged from prayer circles to cold baths to, in one case, music therapy, which was just a polite way of saying, keep dancing until you drop. Some abbots thought holy relics could stop the fits. Others brought in traveling physicians who diagnosed hot blood, melancholy, or wind, the brain. One physician apparently advised more wine, which feels like the kind of medical advice that might actually cause dancing, not cure it. The chaos kept spreading. To a modern ear, it sounds absurd, but in those candlelit halls, it was deadly serious. The dancing monks were caught between worlds, the sacred and the ridiculous. Their bodies betrayed their vows of stillness and order. Their faith told them to repent, but their limbs had other ideas. And yet there's something almost tender about it, isn't there? A moment where even the most disciplined souls of the Middle Ages lost control, not to sin or temptation, but to motion. It's like the universe saying, you've spent too long kneeling, maybe it's time to move. Part 1 sets the stage. This isn't just a story about monks dancing. It's about what happens when belief, fear, and the human body collide. When the pressure of the age becomes so unbearable that even the devout can't stay still. Over the next 7 parts, we'll wander deeper. Through the famous outbreaks of 1374 and 1518, through the monasteries that tried to control the chaos, and through the possible causes, from cursed bread to contagious emotion. But for now, close your eyes and picture that abbey again. Candles flicker, bells toll faintly, robes rustle, and somewhere, the soft thud of bare feet on stone echoes through the hall, a strange, sorrowful, hypnotic dance. No music, no reason, just rhythm, ancient, endless, mysterious. And as we drift deeper into the tale, we might just find that history's strangest mysteries still have a heartbeat. The monks weren't alone in their strange fits. Across medieval Europe, this mysterious dancing began to appear everywhere, in towns, villages, and churches. It was like a contagious rhythm that needed no music, no reason, and no mercy. Picture a cobblestone square somewhere along the Rhine River. The summer sun is high, market stalls buzz with chatter, and suddenly, a woman begins to dance. At first, people laugh. Maybe she's celebrating. Maybe she's had too much ale, but she keeps going, 1 hour, 2 hours. Her legs tremble, her face turns pale, yet she doesn't stop. Then another joins her, and another. By nightfall, the square is full of bodies spinning, stomping, twisting. Some sing hymns, some scream prayers, some cry out in pain. This was no festival. It was frenzy. People called it the dancing plague, the St. Vitus's dance, or simply the madness. It defied every law of reason they knew. And remember, these were people who already believed in dragons, relics, and miracles. For something to scare them, it had to be truly bizarre. The chronicles describe scenes that sound almost theatrical. Whole groups dancing hand in hand, weaving through streets like processions of the possessed. They leapt into rivers, rolled on the ground, or collapsed from exhaustion. Onlookers tried to restrain them, but it was like trying to hold back the tide. They'd break free and dance harder. Some screamed that angels commanded them. Others swore demons beat invisible drums above their heads. And everywhere the same strange pattern: exhaustion, collapse, revival, and more dancing. When we imagine it now, we might picture it as comedy, like an ancient flash mob or some medieval dance challenge gone wrong. But the reality was terrifying. These were people genuinely trapped inside their own bodies, forced to move until they dropped. It was as if the mind had disconnected from the flesh, and the flesh refused to listen. No one was safe from it. Men, women, children, monks, nuns, beggars, merchants. The dance took them indiscriminately. Some outbreaks lasted days, others, weeks. There are accounts of entire bridges collapsing under the weight of convulsing dancers, hundreds plunging into the water below. When the church saw this, it didn't reach for a medical book. It reached for a crucifix. To the medieval mind, this had to be supernatural. A curse, a punishment, or perhaps an unwanted miracle. Some believed it was Saint Vitus, patron saint of dancers and nervous disorders, inflicting penance on the sinful. Others blamed the devil. A few even thought the afflicted were holy, their bodies channels for divine energy too powerful to contain. Meanwhile, local physicians scrambled to offer explanations that sounded almost poetic in their absurdity. One said it was hot blood rising to the brain. Another suggested humors disturbed by moonlight. There were no neuroscientists, no psychologists, just desperate guesses and the occasional bucket of cold water thrown at the nearest dancer. But the most curious thing was how contagious it seemed to be. The sight of others dancing was enough to trigger new cases. One person's frenzy could infect dozens. It was as if the human brain, already fragile from famine and fear, saw someone lose control and decided to join in. In this way, dancing mania spread like wildfire through medieval towns. Aachen in 1374, Cologne, Metz, Strasbourg. Everywhere the same symptoms, the same helpless rhythm. Monks recorded these events in their manuscripts with a mix of horror and fascination. Some monasteries even kept written accounts that read like medical reports, though with a distinctly theological flavor. One such note described the afflicted as struck by madness and leaping like frogs, unable to speak save in song. It wasn't just the body, it was the soul in crisis. Think about what life must have felt like then. The plague had killed millions, crops failed, war and famine were constants. People prayed daily for relief, and when none came, their belief system bent under the weight of despair. Sometimes when the human mind can't find release through words or prayer, it finds release through movement, through something primal, something the conscious mind can't explain. To those living through it, the dance was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. They gathered to watch as though witnessing an exorcism, or perhaps a miracle in motion. Parents dragged children home to keep them from catching the madness. Priests led processions to banish the curse. Bells rang through towns, holy relics were carried through the streets, and still, the dancers danced. Some towns took a more practical approach. They banned music. In Strasbourg, officials ordered that all drums, pipes, and fiddles be locked away. You can almost hear the decree, "No more dancing," by order of the council. It didn't work. The dancers didn't need music. Whatever tune they heard came from somewhere deeper, a rhythm only they could perceive. And then came the cures. The best minds of the Middle Ages suggested everything from fasting to exorcism to, believe it or not, more dancing. They built stages in city squares, hired musicians, and encouraged the afflicted to dance it out until they collapsed, hoping it would purge the spirit from them. It was medieval logic at its most enthusiastic and least effective. When that failed, they turned to the church. Monks prayed over the dancers, sprinkled holy water, and tied them with linen bands. Some were taken to chapels dedicated to Saint Vitus, where priests chanted hymns and hoped the saint would lift the curse he supposedly caused. There are records of the dancers being laid before relics or forced to walk barefoot to shrines. Occasionally they recovered, or more accurately, the episode simply ended. But in the moment, no one knew why. And while much of the mania happened in towns, the echoes reached the monasteries. Reports tell of monks caught in fits of laughter or motion, nuns struck by compulsive twirling. Inside those cloisters where silence and discipline ruled, the eruption of dance must have been both comic and horrifying. Imagine rows of brown robes flapping, candles knocked over, a bewildered abbot shouting prayers over the chaos. Even now, reading those accounts feels like slipping into a fever dream. These weren't isolated incidents. Over centuries, from Italy to England, groups of dancers appeared, vanished, reappeared. And every time, people said the same thing: they could not stop. Modern scholars look back and call it mass psychogenic illness, collective hysteria born of trauma, starvation, and fear. But to the people of that age, there was no need for medical jargon. They knew what they saw: ordinary humans overtaken by something bigger than themselves. And in that sense, the dancing mania wasn't just madness. It was a mirror. It showed the Middle Ages exactly what it was afraid to see: how fragile, how breakable the human mind could be. For the monks who lived through it, the memory lingered. Some wrote about it as warning, others as wonder. In their manuscripts, you can almost feel their tone shifting between terror and amusement. It's as though they're saying, "We don't understand it, but perhaps God does." And maybe that's the strange charm of this story. It's not only a tale of hysteria, it's a reminder of how deeply human those centuries really were. Beneath the superstition and stone walls, those monks laughed, feared, prayed, and lost control just like anyone else. By the time the dancing fever faded from one town, it had already begun in another. The rhythm passed from heart to heart like a secret whisper, a contagious song echoing across generations. And so, while the rest of the world sees the Middle Ages as quiet, dark, and grim, history remembers that for a brief, bizarre moment, Europe was dancing, monks and merchants alike caught in the same invisible music. As the candles in our imagined monastery flicker lower, you can almost hear the sound of it, the faint scuff of sandals on stone, the murmurs of prayer blending into rhythmic footsteps, a strange harmony of devotion and delirium. So let's keep that rhythm softly in the background as we move deeper into this mystery, to the great outbreaks that defined it, and the desperate attempts to explain it. Because in the next chapter of our sleepy medieval adventure, we'll travel to the year 1374, when an entire valley began to dance. Imagine this. The year is 1374, midsummer, along the Rhine River in what's now Germany. The air smells of hay and sweat and river mist. The bells of Aachen are tolling, not for prayer, but for panic. The city square is packed, and everyone is dancing. It started, as always, with a few people, though no one could later agree on who exactly. Some said it was a group of pilgrims. Others swore it began with a lone woman praying in the street. But by the time anyone thought to stop it, hundreds were already moving in a trance. They spun, leapt, twisted, shouted. Their eyes were open but blank, as though something else was looking through them. For hours they danced, then days. The chroniclers tell us the dancers shouted the names of demons, tore at their clothes, and pleaded for mercy. But they couldn't stop. They collapsed, drenched in sweat, limbs shaking, only to rise again moments later as though pulled up by invisible strings. The townspeople gathered in horrified fascination. Some brought water, others crosses, and a few, being medieval entrepreneurs, saw opportunity. Food stalls opened beside the dancers, selling bread and beer to onlookers. Imagine the carnival atmosphere, part tragedy, part absurdity, and the worst part? The music. You'd think the last thing anyone would want around a bunch of frenzied dancers is a band. But local authorities, desperate for control, thought music might calm them down. So fiddlers were hired, drums were beaten, and soon the whole square became a grotesque festival. Hundreds of convulsing figures moving to the beat of a terrified city band. But the music only made things worse. The rhythm seemed to feed the madness. Dancers collapsed, were carried away, and new ones joined in. It spread to Cologne, Metz, Utrecht, Liège, town after town. It was like watching fear itself go viral. Church records describe priests performing mass exorcisms, sprinkling holy water on anyone who twitched. Some claimed to see dark shapes hovering above the crowds, angels, demons. or perhaps just smoke from too many candles. Others thought it was divine punishment, that the end times were near. One chronicler wrote that the dancers leapt so high that their feet touched the heavens, and when they fell, they broke their ribs and spat blood. Whether he meant it, literally or metaphorically, no one can say, but it paints a vivid picture of a people undone, bodies that had become prayers, flailing towards salvation or madness. Months later, the epidemic finally burned out. The winter came, food ran short, and those still able to walk simply stopped. The mania left behind a trail of dead and bewildered survivors. And then, almost as suddenly as it had begun, it disappeared. But it wasn't gone for good. Fast forward to the summer of 1518 in Strasbourg, then part of the Holy Roman Empire. This is the most famous of all the outbreaks. It's July. The sun is relentless, the air thick and heavy. A woman named Frau Trophäa walks into the street and begins to dance. No music, no festival, no reason. Her husband begs her to stop. Neighbors watch from their windows. She keeps dancing. She dances through the day, through the night. Her feet blister, bleed, but she doesn't rest. People gather, first out of curiosity, then out of fear. And then, as if the sight itself were infectious, others begin to join her. Within a week, there are 30, then 100, then 400. The authorities panic. Strasbourg was a wealthy, bustling city, but it wasn't equipped for spontaneous dance marathons of the possessed. Physicians were summoned, and in a very 16th century twist of logic, they diagnosed the dancers with hot blood. The cure? More dancing. You can't make this up. So they cleared out the guild halls, built a wooden stage in the city square, and hired musicians to play so the sick may dance themselves well. Doctors watched approvingly while the afflicted writhed to the rhythm. It was medical theater, medieval style, but dance therapy backfired spectacularly. The music whipped the dancers into even greater frenzy. People fainted, some died from exhaustion, others simply vanished. Within weeks, Strasbourg had turned into something between a festival and a mass exorcism. Eyewitnesses described the dancers as pale, trembling, foam at their lips, limbs jerking uncontrollably. Many screamed in agony, others laughed hysterically. Some prayed for deliverance, others shouted that they could see visions, angels, saints, or flashes of light above them. And yet, even as they fell, more joined. City officials were out of ideas. The clergy declared it an act of divine wrath and ordered the dancers to be taken to the chapel of Saint Vitus, the same saint blamed for earlier outbreaks. There, priests prayed, poured holy oil on their feet, and tied red cloths around their necks, a symbolic binding of the spirit. Slowly, mercifully, the mania faded. By the end of that summer, the dancing stopped. Frau Trophäa herself disappeared from the records, though legend says she survived. The musicians packed up. The council burned the wooden stage. Strasbourg tried to forget, but it never truly did. Centuries later, when historians dug up the old city records, they found detailed accounts written by clerks and priests. You can almost hear the disbelief in their words, the confusion of people trying to make sense of a nightmare in daylight. They weren't writing myth. They were documenting an event they'd witnessed with their own eyes. And they weren't alone. Reports of dancing plagues continued into the 1600s, even as Europe began to modernize. Wherever it appeared, the pattern was the same: fear, frenzy, collapse, recovery. Always inexplicable. Always human. There's something eerie about how precisely these events echo each other across time, as if they were choreographed by history itself. Now, sitting here centuries later, we can chuckle at the absurdity. An entire city of dancers, doctors prescribing music, priests chasing rhythms with rosaries. But imagine being there. Imagine being one of them, trapped in a body that won't stop moving, watching your own hands and feet obey some unseen will. It's terrifying. And yet, there's something poetic about it too. Because even in their madness, these people were alive. Their movements, frantic, painful, unstoppable, were a kind of desperate communication. They were telling the world something it couldn't yet understand, that fear, faith, and the human mind are tangled far more tightly than anyone dared admit. And that's where the monks return to our story. Because inside those stone monasteries, where silence was sacred and the body was supposed to be still, this strange rhythm didn't just creep in from the streets. It found a home. The dancing English monks. That's what the records later called them. Pious men, trained in prayer, suddenly overtaken by laughter, music, and uncontrollable movement. Their abbot tried to restrain them. Their fellow brothers prayed over them. But they kept dancing through the corridors like holy jesters possessed. Was it hysteria? Was it faith? Or something in between? A physical manifestation of the divine chaos they'd been bottling up all along? We'll never know for certain. But we do know this. The same invisible music that swept through Strasbourg and Aachen eventually reached the monasteries. And when it did, it turned religion itself into a kind of performance. In a way, the monks weren't that different from Frau Trophea. Both had been living in a world of strict order. And when the order cracked, they danced through the gap. By now, the church was scrambling for explanations, but none would satisfy. Some said the devil had entered through the bread, that the grain had been cursed. Others believed witches had hexed the rivers. There was even a rumor that God himself was testing humanity's devotion by forcing his followers to worship through movement. Whatever the cause, it was clear that something deep in the medieval psyche had come undone. And if you listen closely enough, you might still hear the echo, a soft shuffle of sandals, a faint chant carried on the wind, the ghostly rhythm of a century that couldn't stop moving, no matter how hard it tried. So let's follow that sound into the heart of the monasteries, where faith, fatigue, and frenzy all collided behind cloistered walls. Because next, we're stepping into the sacred halls of the dancing monks themselves. The monasteries of medieval England were meant to be sanctuaries of order. Stone walls, silent corridors, the low hum of Gregorian chant echoing through candlelight. Everything had rhythm, but it was the rhythm of prayer, of discipline, of quiet repetition. And then, the monks started dancing. It sounds like the opening to a Monty Python sketch, but it's real, or at least real enough to have made its way into the church records. Sometime in the late Middle Ages, reports began to circulate of monks and nuns falling into fits of laughter, song, and uncontrollable movement. The accounts vary. Some say it began during a service, others claim it broke out during fasting season. Either way, the image is unforgettable. Rows of solemn brothers suddenly bursting into movement, habits flaring, sandals slapping against the flagstones. Imagine the abbot's face. One chronicler described it like this: "The brethren were seized by an unholy joy, moving without music, shaking as though struck by fever, and crying out the name of the Lord." That might sound dramatic, but it wasn't entirely unique. The monasteries were tightly wound places, hours of prayer, strict diets, almost no social release. It's not hard to see how tension could build up. Add hunger, exhaustion, maybe a touch of superstition, and suddenly one monk starts twitching, another laughs, a third joins in. Within minutes, the chapel looks less like a house of God and more like an out-of-control dance rehearsal. Some monks believed they were possessed by demons. Others thought the Holy Spirit had entered them, blessing them with ecstatic movement. In a way, both explanations were comforting, because neither required admitting that the mind itself might be breaking. One famous English case, sometime in the 14th century, tells of a Benedictine monastery where several brothers began to dance during Mass and couldn't stop until nightfall. They tore their robes, collapsed from exhaustion, and later claimed they'd felt a divine wind enter their bodies. The abbot ordered days of prayer and fasting to purge whatever spirit had caused it. The following week, it happened again. Soon the dancing spread to nearby convents. Nuns twirled and laughed until they fainted. Some claimed visions of saints, spinning in golden circles. Others screamed that angels were lifting them into the air. Priests came to exorcise them, swinging incense and chanting Latin so forcefully it probably scared half of them back to normal. But others kept dancing, too. Outsiders, it must have looked absurd. To the church, it was embarrassing. Monks were supposed to embody control, the triumph of soul over flesh. Seeing them spin and shout in front of the altar was like watching the foundations of order come loose. So the bishops called councils, the abbots wrote letters, and the theologians sharpened their quills. Was it witchcraft, heresy, or just divine punishment for too much pride? Their conclusions, as always, depended on the mood of the century. Some thought it was moral decay, that even holy men weren't immune to temptation. Others thought it was mercy, that God had chosen to make them vessels of holy ecstasy. And then there were the practical abbots who blamed it on spoiled bread. That theory actually holds more weight than it sounds. Bread was central to monastic life, baked in-house, often from damp or moldy rye. Modern scientists believe that some of that rye might have been contaminated with ergot fungus, a natural hallucinogen, the same substance that later inspired the creation of LSD. So yes, it's entirely possible that these devout English monks were tripping on medieval acid without knowing it. But even if ergot poisoning played a role, it doesn't explain everything. The outbreaks were too synchronized, too social. Something deeper was happening, a kind of shared emotional storm. And if you think about it, monasteries were perfect pressure cookers for hysteria. You have sleep deprivation, long fasting, extreme routine, isolation, constant chanting and guilt about every passing thought. Mix all that with fear of the devil, and you've basically built the 14th century equivalent of a mental health hazard zone. When one monk began to shake, it wasn't just a body trembling, it was a mind breaking the rules. And that gave permission, subconsciously, for others to follow. Before long, half the abbey was caught in the rhythm. A witness once described monks dancing until the dawn, smiling through tears as if freed from invisible chains. That line, buried in a 15th century manuscript, might be the most haunting and human thing ever written about the incident. Because beneath all the chaos, maybe there was relief. Maybe for a moment, they weren't monks, or sinners, or servants. They were just people who needed to move. Of course, not everyone saw it that way. Some abbots took drastic measures. Dancers were locked in their cells or tied to pillars until the spirit left them. Others were sent on pilgrimages to the shrine of Saint Vitus, the medieval patron of, ironically, dancers and epileptics. There, they'd kneel barefoot, trembling, until they could convince everyone they were cured. And yet word of the dancing monks spread across England like wildfire. The story was too strange not to share. Pilgrims whispered about it on the roads. Minstrels turned it into bawdy songs. It became part of that strange medieval genre. Half miracle, half comedy. Some paintings even survive, showing holy men in awkward poses, mid-twist, eyes wide and ecstatic. Historians debate whether these were moral warnings or inside jokes. But it's hard not to imagine a smirk on the artist's face as he painted a monk mid-pirouette. The laughter didn't stop there. In one monastery in Lincolnshire, a group of young novices supposedly began mimicking the possessed brethren as a prank, and then found themselves unable to stop laughing. Their punishment was poetic. 7 days of silence and kneeling, prayer. The record notes they complied without a smile. By now, the church couldn't ignore the pattern. The same symptoms kept appearing: trembling, laughter, uncontrollable dance. So theologians began connecting it to a broader phenomenon, the so-called choreomania, or dance madness. It had been seen in towns and cities, but in the cloisters, it took on a sacred flavor. They decided it must be a battle between good and evil taking place inside the body, a kind of spiritual tug-of-war, with the devil playing tambourine. From a modern lens, though, it looks more psychological than spiritual. These monks weren't cursed, they were overwhelmed. They lived in an age of fear, plague, famine, war, guilt. The human mind can only stay silent for so long before it finds a way to scream. even if that scream comes out as a dance. But here's the strangely comforting part. After every outbreak, the monasteries returned to calm. The monks confessed, the abbots forgave, and the bells rang again for morning prayer. Life continued, quiet and measured, as though nothing had happened. The incident became a story, a warning, a lesson whispered in the refectory when candles burned low. And maybe that's what makes it so beautiful. The dancing English monks weren't just victims of hysteria. They were symbols of something universal, that no matter how rigid the world becomes, how strict the rules or heavy the faith, there's always something inside us that wants to move, to release, to laugh in the face of solemnity. And perhaps, if we could talk to them now, these exhausted, ecstatic monks, they'd just smile and say, "Brother, sometimes the only way to stay sane is to go a little mad." As the music drifts through the stone arches, we can imagine the last of them, finally still, breathing hard, robes torn but oddly peaceful. The chaos has passed, the silence returns, but our story isn't done yet. Because while the monks prayed for mercy, others began to search for meaning. Physicians, philosophers, and skeptics all tried to explain the dance in their own way. Some blamed demons, others fungi, and a few saw something more profound, a clue to the secret mechanisms of the human mind. So in the next part, let's follow that trail into the world of early science, fear, and fascination to ask, what really caused the dancing plague? If there's one thing humans can't resist, it's explaining weirdness. You could show us 1,000 people dancing themselves into exhaustion, and we'll still say, all right, but what caused it? And that's exactly what happened after the outbreaks. As centuries passed, theologians gave way to doctors, and doctors gave way to scientists, each with their own theory about why hundreds of people, including monks, suddenly broke into unstoppable dance. Some blamed the heavens, others blamed bread. One even blamed astrology. Let's start with that one. In the Middle Ages, the cosmos wasn't just decoration, it was destiny. Planets ruled moods, stars guided crops, and if Mars and Saturn lined up the wrong way, you might find yourself involuntarily doing the medieval equivalent of the Macarena. Astrologers claimed that cosmic heat or magnetic forces in the air inflamed the blood and triggered convulsions, which, to be fair, sounds slightly more scientific than demons with tambourines. Still, not exactly peer-reviewed. Then came the humoral theory, the go-to medical logic of the day. According to medieval physicians, the human body was governed by 4 fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. If any of these got out of balance, things went wrong. You could get melancholy, fever, or, apparently, an unstoppable urge to dance. So when the dancers appeared, doctors confidently diagnosed them with hot blood. Their cure? Cool them down by, wait for it, letting them dance it out. This was the Middle Ages, where the cure often resembled the problem. You're too hot? Sweat more. You're bleeding? Let's bleed you some more. Still, the idea of dancing it out wasn't unique to medicine. The church had a similar approach, except their version involved incense, chanting, and holy water instead of music. Exorcisms became public theater. Priests shouted at the afflicted, relics were waved, and everyone tried their best not to join in. Neither approach worked very well. By the 17th century, as Europe got a bit more rational, people started looking elsewhere for answers. Enter the scientists. One of the earliest modern theories was ergot poisoning, and it's genuinely fascinating. Ergot is a fungus that grows on rye, a staple grain in medieval Europe. If you eat bread made from infected rye, it can cause hallucinations, muscle spasms, convulsions, and burning sensations in the limbs, all symptoms eerily similar to what the dancers experienced. In other words, the monks and townsfolk might have been tripping on bad bread. The same ergot chemicals later inspired the discovery of LSD, which means, in a poetic twist, that the Middle Ages may have been the world's first accidental rave. But the ergot theory has one problem. Not every outbreak happened in rye-growing areas, and not everyone who ate the same bread started dancing. So while it might explain a few cases, it doesn't explain the sheer scale. Thousands of people across countries all losing control in sync. So the next theory, mass psychogenic illness. Or in simpler terms, collective hysteria. This is where the science gets psychological and a little sad. Imagine living in 14th or 15th century Europe. The plague wiped out half your neighbors. Crops failed. Every sermon warned you that sin was everywhere. You believed demons could slip into your dreams, and salvation required constant self-denial. Now imagine all that fear building up inside a community, pressure with no release valve. Then one person cracks. They start to shake, to move, to express something their mind can't contain. And instead of recoiling, others feel the same urge. The behavior spreads, not through disease, but through empathy. That's the modern explanation. The dancing wasn't infection, it was expression. A language of the body, spoken by people who didn't know how else to speak. Mass hysteria has appeared in many forms throughout history. In the 1960s, it was laughing epidemics in Tanzanian schools. In the 1980s, fainting fits in factories. Even today it happens. Waves of tics, panic, or compulsion spreading online through videos and social contagion. The human mind is astonishingly good at syncing up with the emotions around it. So maybe the monks weren't mad at all. Maybe they were just human, reacting to unbearable stress in the only way they could. You can almost imagine it. After months of silent prayer, cold meals, and endless self-denial, one monk starts tapping his foot. Another joins in, laughing. Nervously, soon half the abbey is moving. It's not rebellion, it's release. The abbot sees chaos. We see catharsis, but there's something deeper here too. A tension between the sacred and the psychological. Because to those monks, their minds and souls weren't separate. If their bodies were moving, it had to mean something spiritual. Either God was visiting, or the devil was possessing. There was no, maybe you're just stressed, brother. That's the tragedy and the beauty of it. The medieval world didn't have words for trauma, anxiety, or burnout. It had only religion. And sometimes that wasn't enough to hold back the flood. So the body spoke. It danced. There's another layer too, a cultural one. In many medieval festivals, dancing was both celebration and exorcism. People danced to ward off evil, to bring rain, to honor saints. Movement was prayer. It made sense that in moments of crisis, people might return to it instinctively, even if it spiraled out of control. It's strange to think about, but these outbreaks might have been both tragedy and therapy. Yes, people died from exhaustion, but for others, the dance might have been the only time they truly felt alive. A few minutes of freedom in lives otherwise ruled by fear. And isn't that kind of universal? When modern life overwhelms us, we don't call priests. We go to concerts, gyms, or clubs. We lose ourselves in movement. Different clothes, same need. So maybe the dancing monks weren't symbols of madness. They were early pioneers of something we all do in our own way, turning chaos into rhythm. Still, not everyone in the Middle Ages found that comforting. The church needed order. So when the explanations turned from holy to human, they doubled down on the idea of sin. The monks, they said, had given in to temptation. They had let the devil into their limbs. Some were punished with fasting. Others were isolated. And once again, the monasteries returned to silence, even if that silence felt heavier than before. From our modern perspective, we might say they were victims of stress, starvation, and suggestion. But back then, they saw it as a spiritual lesson, proof that even holiness could tremble. And maybe that's why the story survived. Because the dancing monks, ridiculous as they might sound, represented something the medieval world secretly understood. That sometimes faith alone isn't enough to keep the body still. Now, centuries later, the scientists have their theories. The historians have their footnotes and the psychologists have their terms. But none of it quite captures the mystery, because behind every diagnosis, ergot, hysteria, suggestion, there's still that haunting question: why dancing? Of all the ways the human mind could break, why movement? Why joy of all things? As the language of despair? Maybe deep down the human body knows something the mind forgets. That even in madness, there's rhythm. That even in fear, there's the urge to move. And so they danced. As we leave the world of science behind, our story turns once more toward faith. Because for all the church's confusion, it never gave up on one idea: that dance itself could be divine. In the next part, we'll explore that belief, how medieval Europe saw movement as both prayer and peril, because the dancing plague wasn't just a medical mystery, it was a spiritual paradox. If you've ever been in a cathedral, the kind that humbles you into whispering, you can imagine the monk's dilemma. Here they were, sworn to silence, obedience, and stillness. And yet their bodies wanted to move. It's almost poetic. The closer you try to get to heaven, the more your feet start itching. In medieval Christianity, dance was a paradox, holy and heretical at once. On one hand, movement was seen as divine expression. The Psalms encouraged believers to praise his name with dancing. Biblical kings like David famously danced before the Ark of the Covenant, so passionately, in fact, that his wife scolded him for looking undignified. But on the other hand, the church's moral watchdogs, theologians, bishops, and the occasional very grumpy monk saw dance as a slippery slope. If rhythm could lift the soul toward God, it could just as easily pull the body toward sin. And for medieval minds, that was the real danger. The body was suspect. It was the vessel of temptation, the fragile skin between holiness and desire. So when a monk began to sway, or a nun tapped her foot, it wasn't cute. It was cosmic risk-taking. Still, that didn't stop them. Across Europe, despite the stern warnings, religious dancing persisted. It appeared in processions, pilgrimages, and miracle plays. Worshippers danced in circles around relics, saints' shrines, and holy wells. It was rhythmic faith, a choreography of devotion. The church tolerated it, up to a point. But when these dances started turning strange, uncontrolled, contagious, ecstatic, the line blurred. Were they miracles, or were they madness? That question haunted the Middle Ages, because the dancing didn't just happen in one place. It appeared again and again, in abbeys, villages, and pilgrim routes. Some outbreaks were brief, a few hours, a frenzy. Others lasted days, even weeks. And while most historians lumped them together under dancing manias, the truth is each outbreak had its own personality. Some were filled with laughter, like slapstick sketches acted out by the devout. Monks spun until they collapsed in heaps of robes, accidentally kicking over candles or crashing into choir stalls. Witnesses described it as both terrifying and, strangely, funny. Others were darker. Dancers foamed at the mouth, screamed out the names of saints or claimed to see visions, fiery wheels, angels, or demons twirling in the air. The church recorded these events with a mixture of awe and alarm. Chroniclers used words like chorea, mania, and morbus sacer, the sacred sickness. They didn't know whether to pray or to panic, and sometimes they did both. In some monasteries, exorcisms became choreographed affairs. Imagine the scene: monks in brown robes circling the afflicted, chanting psalms as incense thickened the air. The possessed dancer, drenched in sweat, moves in time with the chant, half ritual, half riot. You can almost hear the confusion in the echoes. Was this worship or was this war? One chronicler in 1374 described a particularly wild outbreak near Aachen. The dancers formed long chains, linked hands, and spun around churches, screaming for mercy. When the priests led them inside, they collapsed before the altar, trembling and crying. Some claimed St. John the Baptist himself had appeared, telling them to dance for forgiveness. That's the strange beauty of it. Even in their hysteria, The dancers believed they were doing something sacred. It wasn't rebellion, it was repentance. They weren't mocking religion, they were living it, just sideways. And that's why the church couldn't fully condemn them, because what if they were right? What if God had touched them? That thought terrified and fascinated everyone. As the Middle Ages wore on, the church tried to organize this chaos. New festivals arose, especially around the feast of St. John and St. Vitus, both associated with dance and healing. In Strasbourg, for instance, a chapel was built near the site of a major outbreak. Pilgrims came from miles away, not to stop the dancing but to join it, in smaller, safer doses. Priests offered blessings, music played, and controlled movement replaced the earlier madness. It was religion's version of damage control. Turn panic into ritual. Turn chaos into calendar. It's a clever move when you think about it. Instead of fighting hysteria, the church repackaged it, and it worked. For a time. But not every outbreak could be smoothed into celebration. Some monasteries became known for their recurring holy frenzies. Year after year, certain monks or nuns would fall into ecstatic motion during prayers. Word spread. Visitors came. The line between miracle and entertainment grew thinner. Before long, local bishops were issuing rules. No more dancing in the cloister. Avoid excessive movement during liturgy. Silence shall be kept in the refectory. You can almost sense their frustration. Medieval HR memos written in Latin. But human nature doesn't follow rules, especially when the body itself becomes the battlefield. And so, the dance returned, again and again, each time slightly different. Part repentance, part rebellion, part raw emotion bursting out from behind the monastery walls. Some saw angels in the movement. Others saw madness, but whichever it was, the result was the same. Exhausted bodies collapsing before the cross, and a church trying to make sense of the noise. It's easy to laugh at it now. The image of monks spinning until they faint, habits flying, bells jingling. But beneath the absurdity was something painfully human. The need to move, to express, to release. We still have that instinct. We just call it something else. A midnight jog, a dance floor, a stress shake before, a meeting, different robes, same rhythm. And for all their rules and fears, maybe the monks understood that too, even if they'd never admit it. Because when the body breaks into motion, it's not always disobedience. Sometimes it's prayer disguised as chaos. In the next part, we'll follow that paradox to its end. The moment when the dancing stopped, not because anyone found a cure, but because the world itself began to change. The monasteries grew quieter, science grew louder, and the age of miracles faded into memory. But not before leaving one last bizarre legacy: a dancing saint, a misunderstood plague, and a story that still refuses to sit still. There's always a moment in every strange story when the music begins to fade, when the crowd tires, the laughter quiets, and the dancers finally slow, unsure whether they've been freed or simply run out of strength. For the monks and townsfolk, who lived through the age of the dancing plagues, that moment came in slow motion. The dances didn't end with one great exorcism or discovery. They simply stopped being fashionable. The world changed, and the dance no longer fit the rhythm. By the 16th and 17th centuries, Europe had begun its long pivot from faith to reason, from chanting to charting, from relics to research. Printing presses were spreading new ideas. Universities were shifting focus from theology to medicine. The world that once saw demons behind every ache now started seeing microbes, humors, and natural causes. It wasn't enlightenment overnight, more like a dim candle slowly turning into a lamp. But it was enough to make the old hysteria look outdated, and as people changed their explanations, the outbreaks dwindled. When a few dancers appeared in a village, locals didn't rush to call priests or saints. They called doctors or quietly ushered the afflicted home. The spectacle faded, the miracle unraveled, and without the audience, the shared belief, the hysteria, lost its fuel. That's the thing about mass psychosis. It thrives on community. Once people stop believing the story stops happening. It's a bit like theater. No actors without applause. By the 1600s, the great waves of choreomania, as scholars would later name it, had all but disappeared. The last known outbreaks in Central Europe were small, isolated, and often dismissed as nervous fits or fainting disorders. But the echoes lingered. In some towns, chapels built for St. Vitus remained popular pilgrimage spots. People still prayed there for healing, especially for trembling hands, seizures, and nervous afflictions. And so, the saint who once cured dancing quietly evolved into the patron of dancers and neurologists alike. That's right, the legacy of this medieval madness still lives in modern medicine. St. Vitus's dance became the nickname for a real neurological disorder, Sydenham's chorea, which causes involuntary movements in children after infections. The name stuck, even though the disease had nothing to do with the original hysteria. It's as if the Middle Ages refused to let go of the metaphor. Somewhere in the back of Europe's mind, the monks were still moving. And maybe that's fitting, because the dancing plagues, for all their tragedy, were never just about disease. They were about expression, a body speaking when words ran out. As monasteries declined, as the Reformation cracked open the old religious order, those repressed energies had to go somewhere. The art, music, and philosophy began to take their place. The same emotional intensity that once drove monks to frenzy now poured into painting, writing, and discovery. You could almost say, Europe stopped dancing and started thinking. But history is rarely that neat. Even as reason triumphed, the world kept its strange corners. There were reports well into the 18th century of convulsionists in France, religious sects who fell into ecstatic trances, writhing and trembling at tombs and altars. In the 19th century, American revival meetings saw worshippers fainting and flailing in fits of piety. Different times, same phenomenon. The dance simply changed costumes. And yet, those old stories, the ones about the monks, the peasants, the women spinning in the streets, continued to fascinate. Writers romanticized them. Scholars dissected them. Painters illustrated them. And in each retelling, something new was projected onto the past. To the Victorians, the dancing plagues were moral lessons, proof of the dangers of superstition. To modern psychologists, they're fascinating case studies in mass hysteria. To artists, they're haunting symbols of human vulnerability. And to us, the sleepy dreamers of the 21st century, they're reminders that reason and madness, faith and laughter still share the same dance floor. Because if you strip away the robes, the Latin, and the plague-era panic, the story of the dancing monks is really just a story of people trying to cope. Coping with fear, with faith, with existence itself. When the world feels unbearable, the body sometimes answers for us. Sometimes it shakes. Sometimes it laughs. Sometimes it dances. And that, perhaps, is the quiet truth beneath all the spectacle. Even as the church condemned the movement, even as doctors tried to classify it, even as chroniclers called it madness, something deeply human pulsed beneath it all. The same pulse that drives us to move to music today. It's strange to think that our modern joy, the beat that fills a club or a festival, might echo a medieval cry for help. But maybe that's the poetry of it. That what once was panic can become pleasure. That what was once seen as madness can, in time, be understood as meaning. So the monks fade into memory, their abbeys crumble, their stories turn to legend. But if you listen closely late at night, when the world is quiet and your mind begins to wander, you can almost hear the echo of sandals on stone, a faint rhythm from centuries ago. A reminder that even in the most rigid places, even under vows of silence, the body finds a way to speak, into you. Our final part will close the circle, returning to the question that started it all. Why did this happen? And what does it say about us that we're still fascinated by people who lost control in the name of something greater, or maybe something deeply human? Because maybe the story of the dancing monks isn't a warning. Maybe it's a mirror. So here we are. The music has faded. The monks have stopped spinning. The world has gone still again. And yet, the story lingers, doesn't it? Because even after 800 years, the image refuses to leave our minds. Men in robes, faces pale with exhaustion, moving in rhythm they can't explain. It's absurd, it's tragic, it's strangely beautiful. And maybe, in its own way, it's familiar. We like to think we've outgrown that kind of hysteria, that our age of science and screens makes us immune to the irrational. But the truth? We've just changed costumes. The medieval monk feared demons in the air. We feared deadlines, dopamine, and notifications. They danced in circles because they couldn't bear their world's pressure. We scroll in circles for the same reason. Different century, same restlessness. The dancing monks remind us of something embarrassingly human. That logic alone can't save us from ourselves. That the body and mind are partners in crime, conspiring to express what words can't. For those monks, it came out as movement. For us, maybe it's anxiety, burnout, or the midnight urge to do something, anything to quiet the noise. And that's why their story feels so alive. Because it's not really about religion, or medicine, or even madness. It's about the timeless human search for release. The monks prayed for peace and found rhythm. The villagers feared sin and found ecstasy. The church sought control and found chaos. And in that chaos, there's a kind of truth. It's uncomfortable, but also freeing. The idea that even our breakdowns, our mistakes, our weirdest behaviors, might just be ancient instincts trying to heal. Trying to breathe. Somewhere in a candlelit abbey centuries ago, a monk lost control. His feet moved before his faith could stop them. And for a brief, strange moment, he wasn't a servant of the church or a sinner or a saint. He was simply human, and maybe that's all we ever are. Historians call it the dancing plague. Psychologists call it mass psychogenic illness. But if you strip away the jargon, what you're left with is something deeply emotional, a community, breaking under the weight of its own silence. They couldn't speak their fears, so they moved. That's what makes the story linger, not the mystery, but the meaning. Every generation rediscovers it because it's never really over. Every few decades, we invent our own version, a collective frenzy, a viral panic, a social contagion. It's the same dance, just with Wi-Fi and hashtags. And perhaps that's the final irony. The more we evolve, the more ancient we remain. We're still looking for catharsis, still looking for rhythm, still looking for peace in motion. So maybe we shouldn't laugh at the monks, at least not entirely. They stumbled, yes. They flailed, they fell, they made fools of themselves. But in their madness, they found something pure. A moment when the body refused to hide the soul's chaos. And isn't that what art, faith, and even history are? Attempts to make sense of our own beautiful disorder. Music swells softly, a slow, medieval melody with harp and flute. So as you drift tonight, whether your mind is quiet or still a little restless, remember them. The monks who danced when the world was too heavy. The villagers who joined, laughing and crying at once. The priests who tried to stop them, and maybe secretly wanted to join. And if, in the quiet dark, your own thoughts start to spin, if your heart starts tapping out its own little rhythm, don't fight it. Just breathe. Because maybe, for a moment, you and those monks are not so different. Just two souls centuries apart dancing the same invisible dance, trying to make peace with being human. Good night, dreamer. And if your dreams are filled with dancing monks, well, maybe they've just found someone new to join them.